McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 5, Chapter 20, Arts of the Pacific and of the Americas. Chapter Outline, Pacific Cultures, the Americas. Pacific Cultures. Much early art of the Pacific cultures was made of ephemeral materials and has not survived. Pacific Cultures. Pacific art is frequently abstracted rather than naturalistic. Small stone carvings of humans and animals may have been carved on the island of New Guinea as early as 1500 BCE, but the earliest securely dated sculptures in the Pacific are the monumental stone figures or moai of Easter Island, the most remote and isolated island of Polynesia. Almost 1,000 of the monolithic statues have been found, with the earliest dating to around 1100 CE. Scholars believe they were carved as memorials to dead rulers or other important ancestors. Whatever purpose the statue served, the islanders must have believed it to be of vital importance to their community, for they went to heroic efforts to erect them. The stones were quarried and partially carved in the island's volcanic mountains. The height of the figures ranges between 8 and 70 feet tall, and each one weighs tens of tons. Yet somehow they were dragged for miles across the island and set upright on elevated stone platforms that probably served as altars. Small stone carvings of humans and animals may have been carved on the island of New Guinea as early as 1500 BCE, but the earliest securely dated sculptures in the Pacific are the monumental stone figures, or moai, of Easter Island, the most remote and isolated of the islands in Polynesia. Almost 1,000 of the monolithic statues have been found, with the earliest dating to around 1100 CE. Wood carving was among the earliest arts practiced in the Pacific. Surviving examples, however, only date back about 1,000 years. These fragments from boats and houses frequently use bold linear designs for figures likely representing gods and ancestors. Examples of Pacific Island wood carving include those from the island of New Ireland in present-day Papua New Guinea. Sculptured figures of carved and painted wood known as uli represent deceased leaders. They are not portraits, but act instead as a point of connection to the dead and are displayed in groups during lengthy memorials. The wood, or the uli, comes from a tree planted when the deceased bones were buried. In some examples, the skull is incorporated into the sculpture. The body of the uli figure is encased with framing elements, seen here, connecting the torso and the legs, covered in a dotted pattern. The face is abstracted with a pointed nose, bare teeth, and deep staring eyes made from shells. Raising their arms to their heads, in this case with the hands bearing identical smaller figures, the uli display both male and female genitalia. They represent nurturing as well as protection and stand watch over memorial rituals held for important men of the community. After the ceremonies, the uli were kept in a man's meeting house until the next memorial service. The Asmat people on the western side of the island of New Guinea connected this to the supernatural world by erecting huge monuments to honor the deceased ancestors. With little contact with outsiders until the early 20th century, the Asmat people had hunted and fished in this Indonesian territory since settling in the area almost 30,000 years ago. When explorers and traders encountered Asmat villages in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they found tall carved wooden bis poles standing outside of the homes. The Asmat believed all deaths were caused by human or supernatural enemies. The death must be avenged by the living heirs to restore harmony in the world. The poles function in concert with ritual feasts held to honor the recent dead and confirm this obligation on the living. Once the feast is over and the death avenged, the pole is discarded and left to decay. All the figures on an Asmat bis pole are family members. Each represents a specific person, not as a naturalistic portrait, but as a conventionalized type. The figures are elongated and have thick necks and large eyes. The entire pole is cut from a single tree, with a root for the phallus that projects near the top. The pole therefore connects the death and fertility as two forces with a powerful influence on Asmat life. Architectural form was considered in men's meeting houses of the Maori people of New Zealand, the southernmost of the Polynesian islands. The houses, like the modern version seen here, were understood as the body of a Maori ancestor. The ridgepole was his spine, and the rafters were his ribs. The face was carved on the exterior, where other elements symbolized embracing arms. Meetings thus took place within the ancestor, which is to say, under his protection, sanction, and authority. The freestanding figures that support the ridgepole inside Maori meeting houses also portrayed ancestors. Their knees were bent in a war dance posture, reminding the living of their courage and their deeds. They were stylized according to Maori taste, with enlarged heads and squat proportions. More stylized portrayals of snarling, powerful ancestors were carved in a series of reliefs that lined the walls. Everywhere, iridescent shell eyes gleamed and glimmered as they caught the light. Ancestors were believed to participate in the discussions held in the house, and these sculptures made their watchful presence felt. The reliefs along the walls alternate with panels of lattice woven in symbolic patterns that related to stories about Maori deities and heroes. The panels were woven by women. Women, however, were not permitted to enter the meeting house, and so they wove the panels from the back, standing outside. The emu is drawn in 2 dimensions against a flat background. It is defined by outlines and filled with repeating patterns of dots, circles, and diamond shapes in earth tones. The space the emu occupies is abstracted and gives the bird an otherworldly setting appropriate to its spiritual purpose. Pacific cultures, much art honored ancestors and deceased leaders or were used in rituals. Scholars believe that the moai on Easter Island were carved as memorials to dead rulers or other important ancestors. The wood for the yule comes from a tree planted when the deceased bones were buried. In some examples, the skull is incorporated into the sculpture. All figures on the Asma's Bith pole are family members. Each represents a specific person. Seeing objects such as the bisque pole in a photograph or museum display tells us just a small part of the story. But even in a still photograph of the mourner's costume, as seen here, hints at the death rituals practiced in the Polynesian island of Tahiti can be seen. Collected in the late 18th century by British explorer Captain James Cook, this costume was worn by a priest or a family member of a deceased ruler. Pacific cultures. Pacific art concerns the order of society, the respective roles of men and women, the continuing presence of ancestors, and the protective power of the gods. We don't know for sure the purpose of the moai sculptures at Easter Island, but whatever the purpose the statues served, the islanders must have believed it to be of vital importance to their community, for they went to heroic efforts to erect them. The stones were quarried and partially carved in the island's volcanic mountains. The height of the figures ranges between 8 and 70 feet tall, and each one weighs tens of tons. Yet somehow they were dragged for miles across the island and set upright on elevated stone platforms that probably served as altars. Sculpted figures of carved and painted wood, known as yuli, represent deceased leaders. They are not portraits, but act instead as a point of connection to the dead and are displayed in groups during lengthy memorials. A bisque pole made by the Asmat people is a tool used in concert with a ritual feast to honor the recently deceased. This Tahitian mourner's costume consists of sheets of cloth that women made from tree bark, a thick sleeve cloak made of bird feathers, a material that was sacred to the gods, hung on the back. The wearer's chest was covered by a wood breastplate adorned with 5 large mother-of-pearl discs with nearly 1,000 shell beads hanging below. An apron of coconut shell disc covered the skirt, and a seashell mask with a single eye hole covered the face. This embodies ideas about order of society, the respective roles of men and women, and the continuing presence of ancestors and the protective power of the gods. Pacific cultures. Australian art traditionally represents the dream time. Australian art traditionally represents the dream time. Dream time includes the distant past, when ancestral beings emerged from the earth. Their actions shaped the landscape and gave rise to all forms of life within it, including humans. Dream time also exists in the present, and each individual is connected to it. With age, a person draws closer to the realm of the ancestors, and at death, the spirit is reabsorbed into the dreaming. The Americas. Olmec carved stone heads represented leaders with privileged access to the sacred realm. These monumental sculptures are thought to represent Olmec rulers. Scholars believe that the basalt material was selected for its symbolic material, a volcanic stone that emerges in molten form from the Earth's interior. Basalt was associated with awesome power of nature. It was thus a fitting material for rulers who believed to have the awesome power of journeying to the spirit world and back. The Americas. Teotihuacan includes a sacred center with pyramids symbolically understood as mountains and representations of gods. The heart of the city was its ceremonial center, a complex of pyramids and temples lining a 3-mile-long thoroughfare known as the Avenue of the Dead. To the Aztec, who arrived in the region long after the Teotihuacan had abandoned, it seemed hardly possible that humans were capable of such wonders. They viewed the city as a sacred site where the gods had created the universe, and it was they who named its largest structure the Pyramid of the Sun, which is this image that we're looking at. Made of rubble in the core and covered in stone, the Pyramid of the Sun rises to a height of over 210 feet. A temple originally stood at its summit. Like the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, Mesoamerican pyramids were symbolically understood as mountains. Excavations have discovered a tunnel leading to a natural cave containing a spring directly beneath the center of the Pyramid of the Sun. Perhaps it was this womb-like source of water and life that was considered sacred by the city's original inhabitants. Farther north, along the Avenue of the Dead, is a large sunken plaza surrounded by temple platforms. The focal point of this complex is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. This gives us our first look at a deity shared by many of the Mesoamerican civilizations. The Americas. The Maya built ceremonial and administrative centers, burials with grave gods, palaces, and made art for gifts and representations of rulers. At the foot of a tall pyramid that the Maya used for religious rituals, the walkway seen in this photograph is built with load-bearing stacked stones to one side and post and lintel construction to the other. The Maya were not a single state, but a culture with many centers, each ruled by a hereditary lord and an elite class of nobles. Warfare between the centers was common, and its purpose was not to conquest, but to capture. Prisoners of war were needed for human sacrifices that were thought necessary to sustain the gods and maintain the universe. The ceremonial and administrative architecture of the Maya was meant to impress. This photograph shows the structure known as the Palace and the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque. We get a sense of the splendor of Maya sites from surviving relief sculpture. A carved panel from the Yucatan Peninsula, shown here, pictures two athletes squaring off to either side of a large ball. Accompanying inscriptions in the center and to either end of the relief identify these men as two kings. They also list the patron's name and the date of the sculpture. Carved in typical low-relief style of Maya art, with flat surfaces and round edges, the figures are dynamic, leaning forward in their ceremonial headdresses. We get a sense of the splendor of Maya sites from this surviving relief sculpture. A carved panel from the Yucatan Peninsula pictures two athletes squaring off to either side of a large ball. Accompanying inscriptions, centered to either the left and at the end, identify the two men as two kings. Maya art also included painting on walls, books, and vessels like this cup from Guatemala, which was made using the coiling technique. Cups like this served as gifts as well as grave goods. The Americas. Maya relief sculpture is characterized by flat surfaces with rounded edges, dynamic figures, and inscriptions accompanying the image. The inscriptions on this wall relief not only identify the two men playing as kings, but they also list the patron's name and the date of the sculpture. Carved in typical low-relief style of Maya art with flat surfaces and rounded edges, the figures are dynamic, leaning forward in their ceremonial headdresses. The Americas. Aztec art includes massive stone sculpture and featherwork representing gods. The colossal 8-foot sculpture of the Aztec goddess Catlicua survived destruction. Although other Aztec representations of Catlicua picture her head as a human skull, this sculpture uses two serpents. She wears a necklace of human hearts and hands and a skirt of snakes. Unlike the fine lines of Maya art, Aztecs preferred more geometric and solid forms as seen in Catlicua's massive legs and thick body. When the sculpture was excavated in the late 18th century, Spanish colonial authorities feared that it would rekindle Aztec belief if left to the public view. They reburied the sculpture in a patio at the university, although it was excavated again and put on public display following Mexico's War of Independence. This shield is made of feathers in a technique greatly prized in Mesoamerica. A specialized group of weavers produced feather headdresses, cloaks, and other garments exclusively for nobles and high officials. The animal depicted in iridescent blue feathers, barbs, edged in gold against the red feather, is a coyote. From his mouth issues the term for war in the Aztec language, naito. Rich in metaphors, Aztec speech also referred to warfare as, quote, the song of the shields, unquote, and, quote, the flowers of the heart upon the plain, end quote. Feather shields such as this were part of the lavish dance costumes worn by warriors in ritual recreations of the warfare of the gods. The Americas. Early art under Spanish colonial rule consists of Christian symbols made using Aztec techniques. Life for the people of Mesoamerica changed with Spanish colonization. Disease took hundreds of thousands of lives. People were forced to relocate. Spanish authorities demanded tribute in the form of forced labor, and local belief systems and religious practices were banned. European missionaries seeking to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity used art to bridge the gap between languages. They took advantage of the local tradition of representing beliefs with images and employed indigenous artists to create works reflecting the new faith, training them with prints brought from Europe. This cross once stood in an open courtyard before a mission church. The cross was carved in low relief by an indigenous artist who combined Christian symbols with Aztec technique. Viewers may have equated the symbols with Aztec hieroglyphic writing as signs to be deciphered for their information. While most of the symbols on the shaft are abstracted, Christ's face is naturalistic, and the flowers on the arms of the cross create an organic flowing pattern. The Americas. Nazca art is known for its earth drawings. Among the first South American peoples to leave a substantial record of art are the Nazca, whom we studied in Chapter 4. Their earth drawings, as this one seen here, were so immense that they could not be seen entirely from ground level. The Americas. Moche art is known for its ceramic stir-up vessels made using molds. The Americas. Sican artists produced gold objects that were included in burials. Beginning in the 8th century, the northern area of the coastal South America was home to the Sicilian people of the Lambakai culture. Although they made ceramic vessels and built adobe pyramids and platforms, Sicilian artists are best known for their work with gold. This funerary mask is made of hammered and painted gold, with added silver over the ears. Small pendants hang from the mask around the nose and ears. Once placed over the face of a deceased aristocrat, it depicts a character known as the Sicilian lord or Sicilian deity. An image repeated in metalwork, textiles, and ceramics. Its large winged eyes, pointed nose, and broad face are typical of Sicilian lord images. Sharp points emerge from the eyes, like the physical manifestation of the wearer's gaze. Sicilians buried works like this by the hundreds in tombs and mounds, sending nobles and sacrificial victims into the afterlife with offerings of gold as well as precious shells, textiles, and copper and bronze objects. The Americas. Inca artist art included stonemasonry, fiber arts, and figurines of gold and silver, some of which were offered to the gods. Example 1. Textiles in Inca art. One of the most spectacular archaeological sites in the world is the Inca city of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is set high in the Andes Mountains. Builders leveled the site to create a small plateau and constructed terraces for houses and agriculture. Also visible at Machu Picchu is the wholly distinctive Inca sensitivity to natural landscape. At the northern end of Machu Picchu, for example, a freestanding boulder was carved to resemble the silhouette of a peak that can be seen beyond and in the distance. Elsewhere, a rounded building known as the observatory accommodates a huge boulder in its wall interior. Part of the boulder is subtly sculpted to create a staircase and a chamber. The Inca believed that stones and people were equally alive and capable of changing into one another. This attitude seems to have resulted in their unique approach of relating architecture to its setting. Like the Sicilian, the Inca offered sacrifices to their gods, leaving mummies at sacred locations high in the Andes Mountains. The dry climate and cold temperatures preserved the bodies, saving not just the flesh and bone, but also the clothing and grave goods that were interred with them. Small figurines of gold and silver were common items placed in mummy bundles. A llama made of hammered gold and measuring just 2 inches tall was tucked into a mummy bundle, hidden on a mountaintop until its discovery in the modern era. Llamas and other camelids were staples in the Inca diet and provided wool for clothing. They also play a role in the Inca foundation myth and were routinely sacrificed to the gods. The Americas. Spanish colonizers and missionaries built atop Inca foundations as a show of power. As Spanish colonizers and missionaries spread through the Inca territories in the 16th century, they sought out and destroyed mummy bundles and forbade Inca artists from making sacred images, which they called idols, such images like the llama we saw in the last slide. They built churches on the foundations of Inca temples as a reminder that the Spanish king was now the ruler. The church seen here, the Church of Santo Domenico in Cruzo, Peru, was built atop an Inca temple dedicated to the sun, called the Golden House. Once covered in gold, the temple's masonry walls became the foundations of a Christian church, its finely cut stone still visible in the rounded wall beneath the church. The Americas. Much Native American art is made for use in daily life and of ephemeral materials that didn't survive. The art of basketry is highly valued by many Native peoples, including the Pomo, whose ancestral lands are in present-day California. Legend tells that when a Pomo ancestor stole the sun from the gods to light the dark earth, he hung it aloft in a basket that he moved across the sky. The daily journey of the sun reenacts that original event. Pomo baskets are thus linked to larger ideas about the universe and about the transfer of knowledge from the gods to humans at the beginning of the world. The first clearly identifiable culture group of North America populated an area known as the Eastern Woodlands, and parts of what are now Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, starting about 700 BCE. Several Eastern woodlands cultures are known collectively as the mound builders because they created earthworks, some of them burial mounds, in geometric forms or in the shape of animals. The Serpent Mound in Ohio, illustrated in Chapter 11, is the most famous of the mounds still visible. Excavations of burial mounds have yielded crafted objects in sheet mica, copper, marine shell, silver, and obsidian, precious metals obtained through extensive trade network. Among the most compelling objects are hundreds of small stone pipes, their bowls carved as an effigy of an animal. The naturalistic beaver here assumes a fighting pose, its tail tucked beneath its body. The barred incisors were carved from actual beaver teeth and inserted into the pipe. 2 freshwater pearls serve for eyes. Their reflective luster signaled the spirit life of the effigy. The Americas. Early art created in the eastern woodlands includes mounds, everyday objects, and burials with materials obtained from trade. Here is an example of early art created in the eastern woodlands. This is Serpent Mound, located in Ohio. The Americas. Ancestral Puebloan cliff house provided apartment house-style living spaces, kivas, and storage built of stone or adobe. The people known to archaeologists as ancestral Puebloans lived in the southwestern part of the continent. They created ambitious communal dwelling sites. One such dwelling site at Mesa Verde in Colorado has become known as Cliff Palace. The ancestral Puebloans had been present in the region since roughly 2000 BCE. Around the 12th century CE, they began clustering their buildings in protected sites under cliffs. A complex system of handholds and footholds made access difficult. This arrangement allowed for ancestral Puebloans to ward off invaders and maintain a peaceful community life. The Americas. Mimbres art is known for pottery with black on white or brown on white geometric designs or with stylized figures of animals or humans. The ancestral Puebloans' neighbor to the southwest were a people known only to us as the Mogollon culture, which flourished in the Mimbres Valley of what is now New Mexico between the 3rd and 12th centuries CE. Today, the word Mimbres is associated with a type of ceramic vessel developed about 1000 CE. Mimbres jars and bowls were made using the coiling technique and decorated with black on white or brown on white geometric designs with abstracted figures of animals or humans. Often these motifs appeared as pairs or as figures together. In this example, 2 antelopes stand on opposite sides of the bowl, their bent legs and open mouths perhaps suggesting movement. Although Mimbres ceramics were probably used in households in some ways, most examples that have come down to us have come through burials. As grave goods, the vessels often seem to have been ritually killed, either by shattering or, as here, by being pierced with a hole. The act draws a parallel with the human body, which is a vessel for a soul. In death, the vessel is broken and the soul is released. The Americas. Hopi Kachina dolls were distributed during rituals to teach children about the spirit world. Mask and mask making played important roles in some indigenous cultures. The Pueblo cultures of the Southwest, descendants of the ancestral Puebloans, acknowledged numerous supernatural beings, which they called Kachina. Danced by maskers, Kachina entered into the community at important times to bring blessings. They may appear, for example, in the early years as an auspicious presence, so that rain will follow and new crops will come. Later, after a successful growing season, they dance at the harvest ceremonies. Over 200 Kachina have been identified, each with its own name, mask, and character, and dance movements and special powers that it gives. The Hopi and the Zuni artists make doll-sized versions of Kachina as educational playthings so that children may learn to identify and understand the numerous spirits. The Americas. Northwest coast art is characterized by abstract forms, ovals, and limited color palette, such as masks for potlatch ceremonies. Masks have also been danced by many peoples of the Pacific Northwest. This mask is an abstracted image of a crooked beak, one of the 4 mythical cannibal birds that lived in the north end of the world and ate human flesh. The mask is carved into abstracted forms of a bird's head, its long, hinged beak ending in a rounded point pierced by 2 tear-shaped openings. Strips of cedar bark hang from the head. The red borders painted on the nostrils and the opening of the beak and above the eye give the bird a terrifying snarl. The rest of the face is painted with large black ovals, which are common in northwestern coastal art. In this photograph of a potlatch, dancers in masks crouch in the foreground. Bark fringe covers their bodies. As they move, the mask-hinged jaw creates a clapping sound. In the background, carved cedar poles and painted planks represent ravens, bears, and orcas, and humans in interlocking figure groups. The poles commemorate family ancestors and symbolize status within the community. We should take care, however, not to assume that the photograph accurately represents the potlatch or its elements. Photographers from outside Native communities are known to have staged their images as they recorded indigenous life for outside viewers. The Americas. Plains artists painted figural images to represent warriors' exploits on animal hides and in ledger art. Example 1 of Plains art, created by Howling Wolf. Example 1, painted in pen and ink and watercolor on ledger paper by artist Howling Wolf, entitled A Scout. Plains cultures that formed in the continent's center as early as 8000 BCE were both nomadic and, after 850 CE, sedentary, with the villages raising corn, beans, and squash. Even before the arrival of European horses, many plains cultures were organized around the herds of buffalo that roamed the Great Plains. Initially, they moved on foot with the help of dogs, but by the 18th century, European explorers introduced horses that increased mobility and became an essential part of the buffalo hunts. Buffalo hides provided not only clothing, but also shelter in the form of coverings for tents or teepees. Hides also provided a surface on which plains men recorded their exploits as warriors. Drawn by Lakota warriors, the image here records a battle between the Lakota and the Crow, depicted with vivid recall of its participants. The Americas. Native American artists responded to the arrival of European and colonization with new subjects and materials. Example 1 of the ways in which Native American artists respond to the arrival of European and colonization with new subjects and materials. The Ojibwe bandola bag shown here uses glass beads to create its floral designs, and its shape was derived from the ammunition satchels carried by the U.S. soldiers. Worn across the body with the bag at the hip, bandola bags were made of cotton, leather, wool, or even velvet. They were popular in the eastern woodlands, and in an early example, they were purely ornamental, lacking any storage capabilities. The Americas. Native American artists of the 20th century chose traditional forms and/or participated in styles and trends practiced beyond Native communities. In this watercolor entitled Mounted Warriors, 2 riders with bows drawn face off within an empty field. A geometric form below suggests an architectural structure, and a circular form above combines the Zia Pueblo sun symbol and the Zuni Pueblo sun face. Like Howling Wolf's ledger drawings and the Lakota hide, these forms are outlined in black with flat or lightly mottled colors. This concludes Chapter 20.